The Tecno brand is particularly popular in Africa as well as South Asian markets, but over the last couple of months, it's gaining traction globally, especially in the UAE. Now, we've got here the Tecno Pova, which from a design perspective is not much of a standout smartphone. It has a 215-gram chassis and it's got all your connectivity covered. For people with slightly smaller hands, if you look at it, the large footprint of the smartphone might pose some discomfort in daily use, especially with its higher than usual fingerprint scanner placement. Although the fingerprint scanner itself works fairly well, with a few double takes here and there necessary, but that's something you'll have to get used to. On the right, you find the power and volume buttons as usual, whereas the top gives you the loudspeaker as well as an LED notification light, something we rarely see on smartphones these days. There's also a dedicated Google Assistant button on the left edge of the smartphone, which we didn't find much use for, alongside a triple SIM slot. 2 slots here are for 4G nano SIM cards and 1 for micro SD expansion, so well done Tecno. But there's something about the overall feel of the smartphone that's just a bit off-putting. The build seems fragile with occasional creaks, and the glossy exterior of the phone not only smudges but also becomes very awkward to feel when used in warm conditions. We think a case would definitely solve this issue to some extent, but again, this would just add to an already bulky smartphone. So why the bulk in the first place? Well, that's because the Tecno Pova sports a gigantic 6000 mAh battery, and that's really the biggest selling point for the smartphone. It gives you all the power you need, whether you're indoors connected to Wi-Fi or outdoors on 4G. The battery almost becomes a second thought, and through our usage, it's gone on to deliver ridiculous screen-on times of more than 1 day. That's practically unheard of, and we think more companies should be delivering this sort of battery life on their flagship smartphones, let alone this smartphone, which is priced at 769 dirhams. The drawback though is that the phone charges via micro USB, and that's the port you get on the smartphone on its bottom edge. This is a widely discontinued way of charging your phone, but that's the sacrifice you sort of have to make. A full charge via the provided cable and brick takes around 2 hours using the 18-watt charger. But the battery being the high point for the smartphone, things go a bit south when it comes to multimedia consumption. You find a 6.8-inch panel on the smartphone IPS LCD with a modest 1640 by 720 resolution. This is not the panel you want to be consuming multimedia on, however, it seems to get the job done. The bigger panel means more content on screen, but not necessarily sharper looking content. Viewing angles are good, but that's about as far as I can praise the panel. Even for its price tag, we think a 1080p panel should have been the standard, especially in 2021. Granted, the punch hole makes for a modestly immersive experience, but the display itself needs to be cranked up to 70% for you to read any form of content, and if you're outdoors, even 100% brightness might be a bit too little. The content you watch on the smartphone pairs with the primary speaker grille of the Tecno Pova, which delivers an average experience, although this can easily be addressed via a pair of wireless earphones or wired ones via the smartphone's 3.5mm headphone jack, which you can also use for FM radio support. The Tecno Pova's optics are just an extension of its multimedia performance. The user experience and user interface of the camera is quite difficult to understand, with many options being just confusing repetitions of one another. For example, AI cam and beauty. Pair that with the camera system here and things are far from ideal. There's a 13 megapixel primary camera, a 2 megapixel depth camera, a 2 megapixel macro, and an AI sensor of sorts. While this may be a quad camera on paper, its behavior is far from it. Pictures lack dynamic range and oftentimes colors are subdued. The one thing going for the camera experience is that fast shutter speed, which is something that's a bit of an advantage compared to other smartphones in this price bracket. But not being able to configure your AI modes or the lack of a dedicated night mode on the smartphone is definitely a miss. What the Tecno Pova lacks in the multimedia department though, it makes up for in performance. There's a MediaTek Helio G80 octa-core processor here, clocked at 2.0 GHz. Credit to Tecno here for making sure the user experience remains fluid throughout. With 6GB of RAM and 128GB of expandable storage, there's not much to complain about, even from a multitasking perspective, but a stutter or pause occasionally is something you'll have to sort of expect. It's not a big deal, just something worth pointing out. with the device running iOS 7.0 on top of Android 10, the creaks start to show. iOS requires a very open mind to adapt to, as it comes with so much unnecessary bloatware. You find advertisements in your notification shade multiple times a day, as well as a lot of intrusive applications that are pre-installed. Tecno needs to ensure that it streamlines its software, because not only does it dampen the experience, but also because of all the extra items that Tecno bundles in, the Pova is still stuck on Android 10 on a December 2020 security patch, when it should at least have the latest security patch software-wise. We think this is an easy problem that Tecno should look to fix by implementing a cleaner software experience. So the Tecno Pova is not your multimedia companion, but its power and battery capacity is noteworthy. The phone could easily become a secondary device with reliable battery backup and standby times. For the general consumer though, this is a difficult recommendation solely because of Tecno's intrusive iOS 7.0, but for the rare few who like that software experience or who can adapt to them, it might be worth a glance. Thanks for watching this video and stay tuned for more videos coming up. This was Vaibhav and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.